if you wouldn't mind just giving us, starting with an overview of what was Watergate, what was the scandal, just give us a very crisp timeline of what happened to President Nixon during that. And then if you would, tell us what you think actually happened, and then we can get into the details of it.
Sure. It is a scandal that unfolds over 2.5 years. All kinds of currents and eddies and items that aren't core.
Yes.
The core story of Watergate is that 5 people were arrested on the morning of June 17th, 1972, in the Watergate office building in the offices of the Democratic National Committee. They had bugging devices on them. They were photographing documents. It turned out one of them was a former career CIA agent who was head of security for the Nixon Reelection Committee, the Committee for the Reelection of the President, whose initials spell the word creep. So it's CRP, but it's pronounced creep. The other 4 were Cuban Americans. And it then turned out that there were 2 masterminds from the Reelection Committee who were the overlords of the break-in. So they were brought to trial, burglary trial. They were all convicted, 7 people. And then it turned out that there had been an effort to cover up who else knew, because the break-in was planned by the Reelection Committee. And if you knew about the planned break-in, you were in trouble too. And there was a cover-up because very important people might have known about the planned break-in. And we'll go into it in a couple of minutes. But the cover-up ultimately failed. James McCord, the CIA wireman, wrote a letter to the judge and said there's been a cover-up. People have committed perjury. And the cover-up came apart. And people who were close to that or whose name figured in the press ultimately resigned. And it turned out the cover-up was actually run by the president's own lawyer. But it infected other people on the White House staff. So I'll get into my point of view in a minute, but the end result, when everything came out, and it turned out the president was taping people in his Oval Office. There was a tape system that had run for 2 years. So the public concluded, I think fairly, that if they got the tapes, they could figure out who knew what when. And the most famous quote is from Senator Howard Baker of the Ervin Committee. What did the president know, and when did he know it? And you'll find that echoing in every scandal since, and popularly so. As the investigation progressed, more and more people got caught up in the wrongdoing, and ultimately there was a tape that came out after the recommendations for impeachment, after the Supreme Court ruled the tapes had to be turned over to the prosecutors. This tape came out that recorded the president agreeing with his chief of staff to get the CIA to tell the FBI that 2 people they wanted to interview were off limits because they were CIA personnel. Now, I'm somewhat familiar with the smoking gun tape because I was the 3rd person to hear it after the Supreme Court's decision. I was the one who prepared the official transcript of it, first transcript, and I'm the one that nicknamed it the smoking gun. And the reason I did that was because the president's chief lawyer, when he heard it, he was the 2nd person after President Nixon to hear that tape, the tape of June 23rd, 1972, 6 days after the break-in arrests. He concluded, turns out wrongly, that the president had been involved in the cover-up from the beginning because he agreed to this idea to get the CIA to tell the FBI not to interview the people. Now, let's go back and start with what I think happened.
Wait, may I just?
No, go ahead.
Just for people who aren't, as familiar with the details in the overview. So the break-in happens in 1972 during the campaign.
Absolutely.
Nixon wins an overwhelming landslide by some measures, the biggest landslide in American electoral history.
Yes.
And so he's the most popular president. And then the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein being the reporters on the story, start to break a series of stories about the break-in and then the cover-up, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens then? How is Nixon booted from office? And
well, those stories were breaking before he was reelected.
Yes.
So it is fair to say the public was informed about this minor scandal.
Interesting.
But they still voted overwhelmingly for the president. I mean, he's running against George McGovern,
yes,
an acknowledged progressive. We characterized his campaign as being in favor of acid amnesty and abortion.
Yes.
He promised to raise taxes. It was a wipeout. But then facts started to come out that were embarrassing as the cover-up started to come apart. The actual trial of the Watergate burglars occurred after the president had been reelected. So he wins a landslide in November, but the trial starts in January. And when those 7 were all convicted and facing tens of years of imprisonment, it broke the cover-up. They didn't hold anymore. And as that broke, it was like a flood coming downstream, swallowing dam after dam. More and more things came out that were adverse. The Senate set up an investigative committee, the Senate Irvin Committee. They were public hearings. They were dragging people up there, and the people didn't look good. You know, it looked at bad stories. And then it turned out there was a taping system, and everybody thought, wow, now we can learn the truth. And there was a year-long battle over who got the tapes. And the famous case is U.S. v. Nixon, handed down in July of 1974. Now, it was the prosecutor who subpoenaed the tapes. Americans don't understand it had nothing to do with the Congress. Congress never won a battle saying they could have the tapes because of separation of powers. Now, the president could protect his own conversations, but not from possible criminal involvement. And that was the holding of the Supreme Court. So you end up with 3 things for certain. There really was a break-in. They were caught red-handed. There really was a cover-up. There's just no question about that. Who was involved is the real question. And Nixon really did resign. He's the only president, at least to date, who's ever resigned from office.
So let's start with the crime, the break-in.
Yeah.
You said there was the man in charge was a CIA officer, McCord.
No, well, yes, he was the senior guy of the break-in team, but it would be unfair to say he was in charge.
I mean, on the scene.
On the scene.
Right.
There were 2 goals, as I understand it. I have no personal knowledge. 2 goals of the break-in. One was to fix a listening device, a bug in the chairman's phone, Larry O'Brien's phone, that wasn't transmitting correctly. And the other was to photocopy every document they could find. And the Cubans were supposed to do that. And McCord was supposed to fix the bug. Some people think there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about that break-in because we've never ascertained why. The lead prosecutor, the career
never
prosecutor.
Ascertained why what?
Why did they go in? Why did they go in? I mean, who thought that was a bright idea? You get down to it, and there are all kinds of stories, Tucker, and I can't vouch for the stories, but supposedly Howard Hunt, who's a separate career CIA agent, he said, this is nuts. Larry O'Brien has already left for their convention down in Miami. This is high risk, low reward. I don't want to go back in. But Gordon Liddy, who developed the campaign intelligence plan, was eager to show off. Kind of a macho man. No, by Jove, if that stuff isn't working, I'm going to send my team back in to fix it. And then to fix it, he recruits the head of security for the reelection committee, who's James McCord. So you're right, McCord is the senior guy on site, but Liddy's pulling the strings.
How many of the burglars had some connection to the CIA?
All.
The CIA,
as did Howard Hunt. The only guy who doesn't is Gordon Liddy.
Who was an FBI agent.
Well, he had been an FBI agent and an assistant district attorney. I had the pleasure of knowing Gordon when I was a White House fellow at Treasury, and he was fired from the Department of Treasury because he wouldn't follow direction. And I have the misfortune of having fought to keep him off the White House staff. I maintained he was a loose cannon, he wouldn't follow direction, and we would rue the day if we hired him. But I lost.
I knew him well, and I can verify. I thought he was great, but he was definitely a loose cannon. I would say.
I remember walking down the hallway of the old EOB, the gorgeous marble squares, black and white, saying to myself the day Gordon left, good heavens, he's been here and he's left and nothing's gone wrong. And I pitched a hissy fit. They must think I'm a fool. And then later it turned out that Gordon had run this whole thing.
But can I ask, so the CIA is an intelligence gathering agency whose main purpose is to collect information from around the world and give it to the president so he can make better informed foreign policy decisions.
Yes.
They have no right to operate in the United States.
Open and shut. No operation whatsoever.
And I mean, from its inception, that has been the rule. It seems very strange that every burglar has some connection to the CIA, has worked for the CIA. Like, what is that?
Everyone but Gordon. And Gordon is the moving force. So I tell you right off the top, the CIA knew all about the burglary in advance. Everything. President Nixon knew nothing.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.